So my name is Luke Smithson. I know a lot of you, but if I don't know you, it's nice to meet you. I'm the chair for the Club Relations Committee of NAMA, and we are here tonight doing a uh, a, a roundtable of volunteerism and best practices as best discerned by by the clubs. So, we sent a survey out to the clubs and looked for tried to figure out like what clubs are doing and what their challenges really are. Uh, a couple other members of the Club Relations Committee that are with us tonight, Sandy Patton and Andrew Johnson, they're both co-hosts. They're going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions that you want to put in the chat, you can do that, and they may be able to answer the question directly in the chat. Um, but this is a roundtable with reps from clubs from all over North America. So I don't want you to feel like it has to be just a straight up webinar or presentation. So if you have questions or comments, especially comments about what we're talking about, go ahead and chime in. I do have about 16 or 17 slides that actually have information on it. So in the interest of time, if I need to move on, I will just kind of have to move us along to keep going. A couple other housekeeping things before I get going, just announcements, general announcements. I wanted to let everyone know that an update on the Mexico and Canada pricing for memberships. If you recall in our last meeting that we had in April, NAMA voted to break up the pricing structure to allow Mexican households and Canadian households to join at rates that we felt like were a little bit more comparable to like the exchange rates to try to equalize it a little bit. So those have been set up in software. So any new members that are now joining will find Mexican and Canadian household memberships available to them. And I am in the process of changing over any of our current members that live in those countries so that when your renewals come up that you will renew in the correct category. It's going to take me a little while to get through all of that, but I did want to let people know that those pricings have gone live. And if you find yourself in a renewal anytime soon and you're not updated yet, just get a hold of me and I will make sure that that is fixed up. I have an announcement from our Conservation and Stewardship Committee. That's a newer committee, and one of their members, Aaron, he and the committee, Aaron Tupac, they've put together a survey about looking for information from clubs about conservation and stewardship and what clubs are doing. So I actually have that set up to go out to everyone tonight. As soon as this is over, tonight you'll get an email. It's coming from me, but the email address is coming from me, but it's really from Aaron and the Conservation and Stewardship Committee. And they're just looking for feedback about what clubs are doing and what clubs want to do in terms of conservation or what maybe you're not doing and you wish you were doing, that sort of thing. And that that committee is going to present their findings on July 22nd. So they're going to put together something like this. So if you're interested in that, that's coming up. Um, those are really the two big announcements that I had. Again, this is a presentation by the Club Relations Committee. We meet on the first Tuesdays of the month at 7 o'clock Eastern. If anybody is interested in joining us, it's kind of ironic. This is a topic about volunteerism, so I'm calling for volunteers already. If anybody wants to join us, we love to have new members. Our primary goal, our mission is to try to like drive value of NAMA towards our clubs. So the membership clubs, the member clubs that are out there, roughly 90 of them throughout North America. Our goal is to assist those clubs however we can. So by doing webinars like this, and we have some other stuff coming up, some other things that will directly impact clubs, valuable things that have to offer there on the horizon. So keep your eyes open, and we will be finding out about some of that stuff soon. So I am going to share my screen and get going on this. Okay. Are we seeing my slideshow? Just make sure. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So recruiting volunteers, what's working for our clubs? These are insights So, okay. So I already told you the NAMA Club Relations Committee is devoted to communicating the value of NAMA membership to affiliated and non-affiliated clubs leadership. So we're not working just for the affiliated clubs. We also are trying to find other clubs out there that are looking for help from NAMA and trying to bring them on. That's one of our missions, is to bring new clubs into the fold as well. We actually did just welcome the Florida Mycology Club. That's the newest club that just joined us. So, and one of their members is actually one of our on the club relations committee. So I thought that was pretty cool. Um, let's see here. Just give me 1 second while I figure out how to advance my screen. I'll figure it out in a minute, everyone. There we go. Okay. So, so okay. So why volunteer recruitment matters. Clubs thrive on volunteer energy. Recruiting can be hard, but successful clubs share patterns. So what we did is we sent out a survey to about 90 clubs, and we gathered it from a number of clubs, about 31 NAMA clubs, to see what's really working. So that was a pretty good response rate that we got from people. Um, Almost 33% of the clubs responded here. Um, some of the common challenges that that clubs was telling us about, which I'm sure this is stuff that everyone here can relate to. Burnout, enthusiastic volunteers take on too much and disengage. Time constraints, limited time for onboarding and coordination of their volunteers. Unclear expectations, roles not well defined or communicated. Group dynamics, tension, prestige seeking, communication breakdowns, no show and reliability, like volunteers dropping off or not following through, engagement drop off, so interest fades without follow up or ongoing connection, turnover in their leadership, difficulty in finding replacement or preparing successors, mismatch of skills, people eager to help but lack tech know-how or they're not the right fit for the role. Um, Process overload, complex systems, discouraging or demoralizing volunteers, and uneven distribution, just finding enough volunteers throughout the year, throughout the foray season. So, tons of volunteers on Saturday, nobody on Sunday, that sort of thing. Um, so it seems like clubs are facing a diverse volunteer challenge from like burnout and poor communication, leadership gaps, overload. Um, it seems like some of the solutions in here require clear expectations, better matching, and kind of like sustainable engagement strategies, which is all stuff that we have in here. Um, so common volunteer positions in the clubs, or yeah, volunteer positions, foray leaders and assistants. This is what people are telling us that they're looking for in volunteers. Foray leaders and assistants, event setup, like setup or event support, like setup, takedown, registration, and hospitality, educational roles, so people that are giving talks, walk guides, speech list recorders at your forays, trying to find people for your boards and committees, so the secretaries and the treasurers, that sort of thing. volunteers for fair and expo support, so like one-off type events, setting up the displays, the kitchen help, that sort of thing. Um, the general club operations, website help, communications, finding speakers, and then leadership engagement, finding involving volunteers in decision and like planning. So like there's some clubs out there that are actually using a volunteer to coordinate all of their volunteers. Um, so here are some of the common recruitment techniques that or methods that are being used across the clubs. Like so we asked the question, how are you recruiting people? And in this is kind of presented here in order of what was most popular. So the most common way people were talking about was email outreach, either through like newsletters, through email blasts like MailChimp, that sort of thing. And then in-person asks like at club meetings and forays and annual events. Those seem like the two biggest ways that people were looking to recruit volunteers is either through electronic communication or face to face. But also, these other ones I have here on the right, these are some of the other ways that people were mentioning word of mouth and like personal conversation. Some clubs are using social media, different types of social media to solicit volunteerism. Um, this one, membership forms with interest checklist, that came up a couple of times, and I thought that was a pretty useful tool there. So, like when you sign up to become a member of the XYZ club, there's a checklist there of interest, and I might put down taxonomy, and this person might put down culinary, and this person might put down arts and crafts. So that's as your membership person is working through the applications, they should be kind of pinging those people and be like, hey, this guy's interested in this, this person's interested in that. And then, of course, event-based recruitment. So people said that they do have some success with recruiting, like putting up an actual volunteer recruiting booth at their fairs, at their festivals, even at their forays, looking for volunteers in that way. So we asked the clubs if you're letting volunteers choose the roles. So this is just kind of the breakdown here. Most clubs are doing kind of a mix, using a hybrid approach. So they're letting volunteers choose some things, but they're assigning roles in other ways. Um, a smaller portion, like a third of the clubs that responded, said they're exclusively letting volunteers choose, but in a very small amount said that they're actually assigning the roles. So most clubs combine volunteer choice with assignments as needed. Um, and people made comments like allowing choice boost engagement. But some clubs pointed out that, sometimes there's just critical roles and you have to assign people to that. We also asked the question are people using written role descriptions of expectations. So people are saying like sometimes, like half the clubs are saying they're doing it informally or inconsistently. A smaller portion said that they're not doing that at all. And a few clubs said that they are using very clear written guidelines. And the clubs that said that they were doing that, they did say that when they were doing that, they were getting better results out of their volunteers. So being very specific about what is expected in this particular volunteer role seems like an idea that should be happening. Okay. So are clubs offering training or onboarding um, or mentorship? So most commonly, the clubs that responded said they're doing informal training. So on the job learning, shadowing, um, task like walkthroughs. So just kind of like letting people like learn by observing. Some clubs do say that they have like structured support in there, like they do onboarding packages. Um, I think one club at least mentioned that they do CPR training for their 4A leaders, and that they also have specific 4A leader training. Um, and then mentorship for specific roles, especially like these bigger roles, like a treasurer or a president or a 4A leader. I know one club that for like the mentorship role for the president is the person that's going to be president. They serve as 2 years as the vice president. They do a 2 year term as a vice president, and then they become the president for 2 years. So in that 2 years as the vice president, all they're really doing is helping the president. That's the sort of mentorship that they're talking about here. Um, and then several clubs reported like minimal or no formal training, but noting that they really should be doing it. So I think the clubs that are doing the more structured onboarding are seeing good results, and the clubs that are not doing it are probably seeing, like less than desirable results because they're not doing it. That was kind of the summary that it seemed like was we were getting out of that. Okay, so we really were like asking, like trying to dive into this question here, keys to volunteer engagement. Like like for the clubs who say that they get really good volunteer engagement, we're asking them like what are they doing that's like doing that? Like what do you think is making your volunteer program works so well. So overall, the biggest thing that people are saying is fun first. If it's not enjoyable, their volunteers won't return. So whatever you're doing in your club, you got to make sure you're having fun. So if all your volunteers are miserable all the time, they're not going to come back. So like, how do you make things fun? I don't really know how to do that. I think every club is different, and every club has a sense of what they like to do for fun. um, I'm a member of a couple different clubs, and one club's very taxonomy focused, and that's what they do for fun. And then another club I'm in, they do taxonomy, but they do a lot of other stuff too. um, that's not as heavy into that kind of stuff. And you know every club has its own vibe. um, so community, friendships and a sense of belonging are huge motivators. So you know, making sure that your volunteers are really uh, included and really, appreciated and that sort of thing. And then feed them, like literally, this kept coming up over and over again. Foods, snacks, socials, keep spirits high. People kept saying, pizza kept coming up. So one of the key trends I really saw in all these answers is that mushroomers like to eat, right? And they love free food. So this kept coming up over and over again is during volunteer engagement, during your forays or your fairs or stuff like that, make sure that there's food available for people. um, and then appreciation goes really far too. Talking about like shout outs, you know, recognition like in newsletters or on your social media. At the forays, people talking about, naming people by name, saying, thanking this person and that person for what they've done. Um, it seems like that was a pretty high up in there. Um, Purpose driven. So a couple of people were talking about how volunteers, when their work aligns with their passions, how they stick with it. And it kind of goes back into like that idea, like that checklist, finding out what people really want to do. So if, this person's really into taxonomy and ID, that's the kind of volunteer stuff you should be finding for that person. And if this person's really into cooking mushrooms and eating them, you should be trying to find volunteer positions for that person that involve that sort of work. Um, if somebody likes tromping through the woods and, crawling through the brush, they probably should be a foray leader. Um, Flexibility and balance, avoid burnout by not overburdening volunteers. I think I think what people are talking about here is the old, you have a volunteer that never says no to anything. So you just constantly keep going to that same person or group of people and just keep asking them because they're going to say yes. But eventually you're going to burn them out by overburdening them. So um, I think, clubs were saying that we really need to be careful with that. And then learning opportunities, mentorship, and knowledge sharing foster retention. Um, I can speak from my own personal experience with that. I joined a club about 15 years ago with very little mushroom knowledge, but I really wanted to learn. And the club had a lot of older people, people that are a little bit older than me at the 4As who had been doing a lot of mushrooming a lot longer than me. And they were very open and very like keen to like tell me like everything that they know. And they just wanted to talk mushrooms and show mushrooms and blah, blah, blah. And I thought I hit the jackpot there, right? Because that's exactly what I was looking. And I really got involved with that club and I've stayed involved with that club. So making sure that like you're the people that are coming to forays in general, like they're like a learning crowd. They want to like learn. That's the reason why you come to forays for the most part, is to learn how to learn about mushrooms. So you really have to kind of tap into that, like figure out what people want to learn, make sure they're getting paired up with the right people, and making sure that they feel like they're really being, given something of value there. And then the idea is that that really fosters retention. Like people are going to keep coming back. They feel like they've been invested in when they've been taught this type of stuff, and then they kind of invest back into your club. So the conclusion here really with the volunteer engagement is that engagement really thrives like on like meaningful work, like the shared passion, and definitely like a positive social environment. Like that kept coming up in our answers is we have to make sure that they're really giving like a positive environment and a social environment, like you know, we're making friends here and that sort of thing. Okay, so how do clubs reward their volunteers? So like that was very specifically the question. Like how do you reward your volunteers? Make them feel really appreciated. Um, and this is kind of an order of, popularity. The biggest thing was swags and discounts. A number of clubs mentioned they give away free or discounted merchandise like shirts, hats, prints, bandanas, etc., stuff like that. People love free shirts and free hats. And I will say it's something there's kind of something kind of cool when you go to a foray and all the volunteers, all the people that are actually like working the foray are all wearing a t-shirt, with the club's name on it. I see that happen different, with different clubs, and it looks pretty cool. And then all the new people that are coming, they're like, "Wow, look at that!" They're like, "I want to be in that group." So how do I get in that group? And you know, that's how you start pulling your volunteers in. Again, food and socials. That was a really big one. Volunteer dinners, picnics, pizza parties, holiday gatherings, that sort of thing. Some clubs mentioned free memberships, so complimentary renewals for their frequent volunteers, people that are just putting a lot of effort in, a lot of work in. That's a pretty inexpensive way to reward your volunteers there. Learning perks, one-on-one mentoring, special learning opportunities, workshop access. So, a lot of times clubs have workshops with limited capacity. You want to make sure that the volunteers could be given priority access if you feel like that would help boost morale with your volunteers. Again, one-on-one mentoring. If people are coming, they really want to learn, and you have the ability to do that. That's a good way to invest in somebody new. The public recognition, again, we already kind of touched on that, but that came up an awful lot about how clubs reward uh, their volunteers, applause at meetings, shout outs, and emails, newsletters, formal awards that was mentioned, so at your annual holiday party or whatever, where there's a lot of people around, giving out formal awards to volunteers that have really stepped forward. And then celebrations and events, after parties, annual appreciation events, acknowledgements. Um, I forget what AGMs meant. It was an acronym for something, but um, I forget what they were talking about, to be honest with you. But recognition ranges from heartfelt thanks to like those tangible perks and experiences. Um, and then it seems like consistency and sincerity make the biggest impact. If you're volunteering a lot and you're constantly getting thanked and being appreciated, I think it just kind of follows that you are more inclined to keep coming back. Okay, so we asked about tools about organizing volunteers and what kind of tools that people are using, and more or less in order of what people responded. Google Workspace seems to like really be kind of really popular these days. Sheets, forms, docs for signups, shared calendars, um, are all really popular. You can get, I think if you're a nonprofit, you can get a Google account, a nonprofit Google account, for either free or very inexpensively. I don't remember the exact details of that, but the whole suite of Google Workspace tools is being used a lot by mushroom clubs to really organize. The shared calendars, especially, has been a really good way of keeping people in touch with each other. Sharing calendars with all the key volunteers, making sure your foray schedule's up there and deadlines and that sort of thing. People are using sign-up platforms like Genius. Genius was mentioned by a couple clubs. Um, various types of like ticketing type platforms to get people to do things. I guess the sign up genius is for pulling volunteers and getting them to sign up for things. Um, Club websites, people are still using their club websites to put out, calls for help. And then, of course, paper schedules, still using like the old classic tools for, events and in-person planning. And some of the other tools that people mentioned, Donor Snap, which I don't really know much about that, volunteer donation management. But that is a tool that clubs say that they're using to help manage their volunteers. Um, Discord and Slack, another way of communicating, getting everybody onto a similar thread. And then phone and email. So Google Workspace really dominates. Um, People are kind of playing around with some other stuff. Um, I think I didn't write it in here, but some clubs had mentioned that you really kind of have to like look at your membership and just decide what is best for them. So I belong to two different clubs personally. One club tends to be like Gen Xers or older. The other club tends to all be like millennials and like Gen Z, a much younger crowd. So, one club is still very old school, emails, a calendar on the website. The other club is using all kinds of different things like, Slack and shared calendars and, stuff like that, like group messaging platforms. So I guess you really just have to kind of know your audience with that sort of thing. Okay. So we asked clubs about volunteer approaches that actually work. Like, what are you doing that's really um, helping pull people in? So direct one-on-one asks. So clubs are saying in general that's more effective than mass outreach. And they also noted in there that the direct one-on-one ask sometimes has to be done more than once. You know, you might ask somebody to be a 4A leader and you might ask them two or three times over, a year or two, and they might not be comfortable with it. But I guess what they're saying is you just got to kind of keep pecking at them until they're ready to say yes. Um, that's what clubs are saying. Consistent role assignment, so builds confidence and retention. So, if you have somebody that's really good as a 4A leader, and they want to keep doing that, it's probably best to keep them as a 4A leader and not, yank them around and stick them on other things if that's what they're really good with. Again, food and hospitality, that keeps coming up, incentivize participation with meals and snacks. And then the public recognition that kept coming up over and over again from people thanking volunteers in the meetings and stuff like that. Um, and then I thought this was interesting. Lead by example. Senior volunteers train newcomers by modeling behavior, right? That was a direct quote from one of the clubs. Um, so I felt like what they really meant there is that as the leaders of our clubs, we really need to have like a welcoming and inviting demeanor about ourselves. Like when we see new people at the forays, we need to make sure that we're introducing ourselves to them, introducing them to other people in the club, showing them how things work, Like, if you've never been to a mushroom foray, it could be pretty daunting and baffling, like what's going on here. So really like showing people around and like really being welcoming, that's really um like a good behavior to put out there. And then hopefully your other leadership, all your leadership is doing that sort of thing and just really kind of bringing people in that way. Um, and then knowing your people, matching task to volunteer skills, interest, and strengths. So that came up a number of times. Um, we were asking for some specific examples. Um, Exclusive forays on private land reserves for volunteers. If your club has the capacity to do this. I know the one club that I am in does have a ongoing um, cataloging project of some private land that they've been doing for quite some time, like over a decade. And I know after I'd been in the club for a little while and got to know some people, and like people realized I was really interested in taxonomy, I got invited to go down there to this place in the Pine Barrens that I never had heard of before. And it was like this, thousands of acres of pristine pine barrens. And, I thought I was like, I thought I hit the big time then when I got invited to go there and do that you know. So that's a good way to really make your volunteers feel appreciated. Um, training new 4A leaders through field-based mentoring, right? So I think what we're talking about here is the fact that most mushroom clubs revolve around 4As going out and doing field mycology. And, you know, people that are coming to the mushroom 4As often, not always, but often are there to learn about that sort of thing. And that's where we need to be training the new 4A leaders, taking them out, maybe having a co-leader on your event. So if I'm the leader of the event, maybe I get in like a newer person that is showing interest and they can help me by being a co-leader. Again, the volunteer pizza parties and potlucks, I mean, and the shout outs, those are specific examples. Um, Onboarding new volunteers through collaborative leadership. So I think what the clubs that were talking about this sort of thing, what they're trying to say here is not just having one person that's constantly trying to onboard a bunch of new volunteers, but having all of your kind of senior leadership constantly working towards bringing in new volunteers, you know. So, if you see the same person, if a couple of your leaders are seeing the same faces over and over again at the forays, they should be pointing that out and seeing what if those recurring new people that are coming, if they want to be, get involved in something. And then a club had mentioned encouraging iNaturalist use and hands-on learning for new members. And I think what they're trying to say here is, just really encouraging new, newer people that are coming to these forays, um, teaching them about different things that they can be using. And iNaturalist is a good way to really, learn mushrooms and get involved, especially if you have projects that are part of your club. If your club has like a iNaturalist project and, you're inviting newer members, you're teaching them how to make a good observation and inviting them to add observations to your project, that could be something that's pretty rewarding to a newer person. Okay. So challenges and observations, right? Um, These are some kind of like how like kind of like summarizing the challenges that people are really talking about. So volunteers often don't step forward immediately. They need to be asked more than once. So I think what we're getting at here is that, volunteers often don't come out of the woodwork. It takes some work on behalf of the club's leaderships to cultivate volunteers and to, you know, find people to recognize that there are people that are showing up that want to be doing things, but they need to be cultivated and they need to be shown how to do things and taught and, maybe slowly brought into the process. Um, no one size thing fits all for clubs. So I know there's like no magic bullets that were presented here tonight for anyone for fixing volunteer problems. Clubs vary widely and, all kinds of, size, formality, resources. But I think the key here is to find different little tidbits that work for different clubs and try them out for your own club. Um, some of the other observations here, like tools like Sign Up Genius, um, and some of the other things, like Slack and stuff like that, they show mixed result. Accessibility and tech savviness are key. So as I was kind of getting at earlier, if your club is not, big on like the tech stuff, trying to get them to use a Slack account is probably not going to work. Um, and clubs are still figuring things out and they have limited structures in place. So I think it's important to remember this. If any one of our clubs is really struggling with volunteerism, is, we don't want to get all down and beat ourselves up. We have to remember that, all clubs seem to be having have these challenges with volunteerism and they're constantly figuring things out. And what worked, a decade ago or 20 years ago may not be the same thing that's working today, especially as you're trying to bring in younger people into your forays and your volunteer corps, things do change through time. Um, and some other notable practices. So we're kind of getting to the end here. I'm kind of summarizing some stuff that I really kind of noticed in the survey results. Some noticeable practices that people are doing that seem to really kind of stand out. The interest checkbox at signups, helping match members to roles based on preferences. Volunteer visibility at events, so public facing events, whether it's your own fair, mushroom fair, or Fungus Fest or whatever you're doing, or if you're at other things, like outreach things. I know clubs go to various outreach things, like like a community day. If you're community days, or even like farmers markets and stuff like that, if you have like a booth set up there, they're effective for drawing local help. You're set up at a community day that where the whatever mushroom club and people are seeing it and they're like, oh my word, there's a mushroom club I never knew. And you're kind of drawing people in and you're drawing people into the club to come and participate. But from that group of people that you're drawing in, you're hopefully finding a smaller pool of new volunteers there. Recurring multi-channel request. So really using all the tools that you have available to get the information out there. So um, combining emails, meetings, social media, the one-on-one ask to all of those people to reach the volunteers, not just putting something in a email blast and sending it out there and just hoping for the best. Um, and then relationship first mindset. So long time participation and personal rapport often leads to commitments. Um, so again, going back to like that idea that like when you see new people on your forays and at your events, all of your leadership really needs to be really welcoming and making sure that they're really, you know, introducing or showing people around, just making a big deal out of the newcomers. Um, and that builds up like a personal rapport and gets people coming back. And then as you see the people coming back, that's when you start kind of hitting them like, hey, maybe you want to do a little bit more. Maybe you want to volunteer and help out at this ID table. And then some of the key trends and patterns here. That personal approach works best, most successful when people are asked directly, sometimes multiple times. Active members most likely to step up. As that's what I was just kind of touching on there to some degree. Um, Face engagements are often better than just emailing people. Um, And then this term came up. I actually had to Google this word. I didn't know what they were talking about. Voluntold culture. Um, that means the volunteers are being told what they're doing. So some clubs are doing that. They're assigning roles informally among familiar recurring members. I see that happen sometimes in my own club. There's one of our club leaders, she's very good at telling people what to do. And saying it in a way that people aren't getting, bent out of shape. And, she comes into a foray and she's like, do this, do that, and do that. And people are running around doing it. So if you can get away with that, that's great. But I guess on the other hand, too, you don't want to turn people off by, ordering them around and putting them to work if that's not what they're into. And then, tech has limits, Sign Up Genius is working for some, has caused confusion for others. Um, and then I think we asked very specifically, this is kind I think we're right kind of at the end here. We asked clubs for advice. So like if your club could give any advice for improving, um, this is what people were saying. Praise often and early, express gratitude after each task, ask personally, one-on-one invitations are most effective, keep it fun, food, social perks, exclusive events. Train briefly but clearly. Consider short training sessions or onboarding sessions. So again, we don't want this to be like work when we're all out here doing stuff for fun on the weekend. But on the other hand, there are payoffs for actually training people on how to run a foray or whatever you happen to be doing. Um, Communicate clearly, define roles, tasks, and timelines simply. I like the word simply in there too, like not make it overly complex for people. And then lead by example, demonstrate enthusiasm and passion in your role. Oh wait, we had some more too. I couldn't fit it all on one slide. Um, Offer bite-sized tasks. So make roles manageable and time-bound, especially for new volunteers. If you have somebody that's expressing interest in volunteering, you probably don't want to dump a massive workload on them immediately. Um, Plan ahead, give notice so volunteers can make time. So don't wait until Friday to look for people to run a foray on Sunday. Um, People often want to do things, but they have to, you know, take times out of their personal lives to do this. So stay organized, consider onboarding packets, calendars, and those clear expectations, and just keep looking. Constantly recruit and refresh your volunteer base. So it seems like in there, in the kind of a summary of that advice, um, personal connection, clarity, and appreciation are the cornerstones of the strong and sustainable volunteer culture. So personal connection, clarity, and appreciation. That's what I was really getting out of that, what people were saying. And that's about it for the summarization of that survey that I sent out. I want to thank all of these clubs that replied. I think there's over 30 clubs here that replied, which um, I was really happy with that. There's a lot of clubs that responded to this. So this is being recorded. After we get it edited, I will make sure that this gets put up on the website. And I would also, at some point, I would like to share the actual results of the survey. I have to kind of figure out the most appropriate way to do that. But my intention is to send out the results of the survey so you can read it. Now, the survey is very long-winded. So that's why I really summarized it this way. So there's a lot of reading in there. So, but I do want to thank these clubs and I want to thank everybody that came here tonight. And I'm going to stop sharing. And I really like to open it up and unmute everyone. And I see that there's a lot of chat going on, but I never read any of the chats while I was doing that. But is there any questions or comments that people would like to start out with?
I have one. I was wondering, I agree with your point, I put this in the chat too, but I agree with your point about matching them to their interests. That makes a lot of sense. For administrative positions, typically we don't get a lot of folks signing up for those or interested in those. And I was curious in terms of any strategies that you've heard of or have practiced or anyone else on the call that encourages folks that may want to participate in that, or maybe it's a hybrid where they're driving some things that they're passionate about, but also are picking up some of the administrative work as well.
Mhm.
Um, project
Sure.
management type stuff, that type of
Yeah,
thing.
that's a great question. I'll answer my own personal experience and then maybe some other people will have. I was the president of the New Jersey club for a while, and the way they got me kind of into that, the way they kind of hooked me is they would have annual meetings where all like the key leadership would come to that. And I remember getting a couple of years before I was asked to take on any of like those bigger committee type roles. Um, I started getting invited to those meetings and they were having me come to those meetings so I could at least see what was going on. And the fact that I kept coming to them, I think showed them that I was interested in more than just, I was interested in like some kind of leadership capacity. And then and it ended up being a one-on-one ask. The president
Mm.
just asked me, she just called me quietly on the side, and just asked me if I was interested. And of course I said no, and then she talked me into it. How about others? I mean, I'm sure there's some other experiences there with that.
Hey, I've got my hand up. I'll just unmute myself. I as well had a similar experience with Luke, but I was also voluntold because I was VP for a while. However, that isn't necessarily what our club does, is take a VP to a president. It's just a position, right? So that depends on which club decides to do what with that. With admin roles, it was very difficult when I was president. People stepped in assuming that they were going to do something and didn't actually read what they needed to do. And then those rules and those policies and procedures were so very unclear that for 2 years I've spent revamping the whole thing to make it more legible and more simple so that every person has a task and that all those jobs need to be full. Otherwise, the president takes it on, right?
Yep.
So, and then we do have an AGM because we're a legit society and blah, blah, blah. So, a few months before our AGM, we'll start announcing who wants to let go of their position. And we just repeat and we repeat. And then the whoever is the VP and president usually goes around and starts harassing people and being like, hey, we know you're good with numbers, or like, so we just recruit basically essentially with everything that's been mentioned so far today, including that. But it's a really, really tough one. And often it just falls onto the president to pick up the slack,
And,
unfortunately.
and what is an AGM?
Annual general meeting.
Oh, okay. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, annual general meeting. Yeah. And we required to have one every year to be able to vote in the new board. Because we have, oh gosh, yeah, we get nonprofit status here in Canada. I'm from South Vancouver Island. And so we have to be registered with the province, and therefore we have all kinds of hoops to jump through. But it keeps us also safe because we therefore have insurance to cover us. So yeah, anyway,
Excellent.
yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I think David had his hand up and then Brooke.
Thanks. Yeah. I took over as president of the Boston Club right at the start of the pandemic. And we're a big club. We have about 1,000 members. And like most clubs, there's a small nucleus that does 99% of the work. And, we've tried to do things. One of the things nobody mentioned that I think is kind of important is at the start of every year, we do put together a budget. And in our budget, we always allocate, let's put aside some money that's just dedicated to thanking volunteers, whatever we're going to do, and come up with projects. Last weekend, I rented out a greenhouse room in a brewery. We just had tons of free food. Everybody had a free drink. And we came and did like a mushroom Jeopardy kind of game. And it was just, a really good bonding experience. And I always start off with an icebreaker where everybody in the back of their name tag had a ticket for a free drink. They also had a name of a species of mushroom, and they had to find other people in their genus because that was who was going to be on their team. And so it like grouped people together that were not necessarily knew each other, were sitting together, and people just love it. They love being forced to interact with strangers for some reason, and it works out really good. So we'll always put that in the budget. We also this weekend coming up, we have a special training for people who are interested in being walk leaders because for years people were intimidated being part of forays. But now that we do these trainings, we explain to them, listen, you don't need to know a lot. Just come to the training, see if it's a fit for you. And, we teach them that, even if you pick up a mushroom, you have no idea what it is. What can you say about it? Like Gary Linkoff used to always say, you better be able to say something about that mushroom. And so we teach them, what to show people to look for. Even if they can't identify the mushroom, they can talk and they can talk about it and keep the people organized. We get sometimes 100, 125 people showing up for our forays. And so we really have to have 5 or 6 walk leaders often on a 4A to split them into smaller groups. And it works out fine. I find that some of the best ways I get people to slowly start moving into being 4A leaders too is that I assign them as scouts. And I'll say, all right, your area is, we don't get down there much. We don't know the places. Can you find us one spot that has good trails, at least 200 acres, large parking space, and fairly easy to get permission? Report back on how it looks and let me know what the trails are like. Get us directions to how to get in. And so we discover new spots that way. And every year, I also am in charge of planning all the forays. And in Massachusetts, it's horrible. You have to get permission everywhere you go. And it's I'll start in January, start lining up permission and sending the scouts out to talk to people and get things lined up. Also, we're always trying to get in younger blood into the club, so we have special discounted student rates, and we do special walks for organizations at colleges and high schools, and to try to pull in more people that way. We have I broke the club into about 4 chapters where we've gotten volunteer people to say, I'll lead a chapter for this area. That way we'll get to know the people that live right around the same area. They can go on some little walks by themselves that aren't organized walks. And then that encourages carpooling. So you don't get so many people bringing single cars to the forays and you don't run into as many parking problems. So those are just some of the things we do to try to um, keep people doing it. And as far as the officer positions, I think, just kind of making them feel like an insider at events and things like that really get people closer to saying yes. And you start small. When I joined this club about, I don't know, about 15 years ago, the president came up to me, spotted me right away because we've always had this philosophy of everybody in the club that knows everybody else there except for some of the people. Don't hang around and talk to the people you know. Walk up to somebody you've never seen before and make them feel like they're part of it, and introduce yourself to new people. And it's really gets people immediately more involved and just tends to work out really well. So that's how we get our leadership people. We just kind of get an inside core group that is willing to kind of take on a little bit more. But the president came to me and said, "Well, you write a 1 paragraph description of this club event and we'll put it in the newsletter." I was like, "Oh yeah, that's no problem. I'll do that. Sure." Next thing I know, I'm designing all the forays. Next thing I know, I'm president. And you just kind of get sucked into that vortex, and that's what happens. But that's about it. But just you just got to keep plugging away and doing everything you can to make your volunteers feel like they're part of an inner circle.
Mhm.
Thanks,
Awesome,
David.
thank you.
Brooke, you have your hand up?
That was awesome. Like this whole thing is really kind of exciting because I'm thinking of things that we can do as well within NAMA. And I also serve on the board of the Wisconsin Mycological Society. So thank you, Luke, and everybody for participating in this. It dovetails what I wanted to ask about dovetails on what David said, and then going back to what Melanie said. Melanie, I'm not clear on whether your AGM receives any kind of compensation or uh, or if it's a volunteer position. And I know we're here to talk about volunteerism. I think you're muted.
We do not get paid. None of us get paid. We're all purely volunteer. The AGM is run by the president, and it's basically to vote in the new board members so that
Oh,
they're legitimately voted in. And then we have to send all those minutes to the lawyer.
got it. I
And
just
that-
wanted to say, oops.
Yeah, no, sorry. Then we have a list of directors that's legitimate, and then we can use that to get insurance, to rent places. We also, for our volunteers, have a special relationship for conservation. We work with BC Parks Foundation, so we have access to proposed park areas, and volunteers get special access to that. So we do all kinds of things for that too, like picnics and potlucks and all kinds of stuff too.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love
Yeah.
it. That's robust. What I
Yeah.
wanted to say about the difficulty of getting people to do specific admin work in particular, because it cuts into your time in the woods, to put it mildly, is if the club is in a position, a lot of clubs have a model where they won't consider paying anybody to do a specific task. And I'm kind of hoping that they do consider it. I don't want to tell any different club what to do, but NAMA has from within mostly found people to take on these tasks that were just overwhelming. And the people that we had as volunteers handling it, maybe there was one who was great at it for X number of years, but then they're irreplaceable, especially on a volunteer basis. And I just hope clubs are sort of looking at that because it it's not that complicated and people don't ask the moon. I don't know of anybody who's getting rich off mycology. So,
No, but Brooke, could I say something in response to that? There's also a hybrid solution. We're having a problem in two areas. One is we couldn't get anybody who dependably could put in the time to keep our website up and running and updated. And two, we were having trouble with well, the website was the main thing, but also getting our bulletin out, which is our newsletter. And so we finally took a vote and ended up saying, let's just see if we pay somebody, what'll happen. And everybody was like, no, it's going to be too expensive. So we looked into it. We got a technology guy that's really incredible, and he just became a sounding board. So the people running the website, when they didn't know how to do something, they could just hire him for half an hour to teach them.
oh,
And it took all the pressure off them because they were all in over their head and they weren't capable of keeping up with it. And it really wasn't a big drain on our budget. And we've done the same with the bulletin. We hired somebody who did a bulletin from another club to be a editor for a year at a very minimal rate. And she jumped at it and has been doing a phenomenal job. All of a sudden the bulletins are coming out right as they should. So
I love that for you. Thank you guys.
Yeah, we did much the same. We paid someone part-time, got things done, got it set up for the website, and now we've got people that can just plug away at very simply. And we do negotiate with some volunteers that do a bit more work. For example, we have a bunch of signs created for our massive annual show, and we get them to stay for free for a 3-day, 3-night foray in Cowichan, and that's equivalent of about $700. So we kind of write that into the budget for a few people, especially if they ask for some compensation.
Okay. Do you have your hand up, Trent?
Yeah, I wanted to hop in too and say thank you. Um, and much appreciated. And I think this volunteer and or stipend combination it's an interesting solution for certain clubs. I noticed Sarah said in the chat that they have 6,000 in the bank, and that doesn't make sense. And I think certainly that's a fair number of clubs. Yet other clubs you talk to, their biggest problem is finding volunteers, not their bank account. And I think it's fair to encourage them to, maybe there is a way to spend some money. One area I would advocate is paying for mileage and gas for 4A leaders, so you can get people at these events. Even a little something like that, which is often 25 or $50, can really make a difference for a lot of people. I liked your other idea. Thank you, of putting it in the budget to offer a way to offer fun and thanks to your volunteers. That was a pretty good tip.
Yeah, that reminds me, you mentioned something. I mean, NAMA just gave us a grant for helping to support our volunteers in certain things. And I know that we have in Victoria, we've had several different local associations through the government even offer us money to help produce things. And that would be money to help pay a volunteer. So we don't thankfully need it, but I know a lot of other clubs that could. So that might be something to look into. Government grants, etc.
Melanie?
Yes, we have the Great Alberta Mushroom Foray every year in a different place in Alberta, and our directors get 50% off. That's probably the only perk that our directors get. They do a lot of work, but they get 50% off at the Great Alberta Mushroom Foray, and students also do as well. And we subsidize that quite heavily from the club because registration fees can never compensate for everything, because we get speakers in sometimes from the US, sometimes from BC, different provinces, Ontario, and so on. So we have to pay these speakers travel and accommodation and so on. And so we always have to subsidize that. And sometimes we do get government grants to do that, or the Alberta Conservation Association has given us grants for years. And, this year it's going to be in Fox Creek, and the town itself is giving us a bunch of space to do all our stuff in that we usually have to pay for. So we're trying to use more towns where we are and ask them to participate and highlight some of the things that we're doing in that town for that weekend. The other thing we do for forays is we used to have a thing called foray in your neighborhood. So if you know an area and you'd like to, it's a good area for mushrooms, and you can say, okay, we can, I'd like to do this, but I don't know anything about mushrooms, so I'm scared. I don't want to lead it, but we kind of guide people through that idea of you don't have to know mushrooms, but you do have to be able to sign people in and out of the foray, et cetera, take license plate numbers just to make sure everybody's looked after. So we try and guide those people into next time, maybe they could be a leader, knowing that they don't really have to know mushrooms, that there's probably enough people that will attend that foray that do know something about mushrooms. But it's good to have a couple of books available so people can flip through them and so on. And I think we haven't been using our volunteers in the best way possible. In the past, we've had membership applications, and they've put down their volunteer, what they would like to volunteer for. And we haven't really used that information that well. It's in a database somewhere, and it's just like, it's probably on Google somewhere on our drive. But again, just we haven't been using it as well as we should, and we really need to look at that. And also you're right about the food thing. Like, we've given swag bags away and things like that, and people do appreciate that, with some posters in it and different things that we have, mushroom posters. But yeah, food always comes up. You're right. Food is a big thing, and I think that's probably one of the things we need to look at more. Yeah, that's it for us. Thank you.
I want to make one huge warning. Just because someone wants to volunteer for something doesn't mean that they're going to be helpful. Be very, very aware. I just took over all of the executive positions 2 years ago because everyone didn't want to do what they needed to do. Like, that's not good. So don't do that to yourselves. Don't do it. Just go for it.
That's a really good point, Melanie. I was curious, like, what have you done differently? Because I think that can be a common problem, especially as clubs are growing, right? It comes from, you're kind of this family building it together, and all of a sudden it becomes like a more formal organization. And how do you vet folks? How do you kind of like build that trust? And also, some people, like I know in the survey, mentioned like mismatch, right? Skills. They may have the passion, but it's just, they can't get it done. So I was curious, how have you evolved that over the last couple of years?
Well, what I did was I was very honest. I was very, very honest about, hey, I'm burning out. I got a full-time job. And if someone doesn't step up, like, this club's gonna implode. So I said that a few times, and finally people started to step up, right? So it's just more about honesty and saying it doesn't have to be all day, every day. And spelling it out with a calendar of tasks and that sort of thing. And making sure that the platform is usable, like user friendly and simple. And so far, with Google Workspace has been the simplest thing for all of us to learn from multiple different generations. We have someone that onboards people into that. So it's more just coaxing people to trust you with with what you have set up. I mean, yeah, it's a tough one. And sometimes you got to have someone that's not going to do it properly, and you have to have a conversation with them. And if they don't want to fulfill it, then you have to try and move on and be honest about that, right? Nutka, sorry. So, yeah, there you go. I don't know if that'll help you.
Now, for different organizations, for ours, we're in Ontario and Canada and Toronto. We do forays, but we now, since COVID, we do different levels. We do a welcome walk, which just is basically etiquette of the forest. Then after they do a test, then they do a couple of walks where they're guided walks, and they learn more about mushrooms. Like the first one, just different things about the mushrooms. The second section, how to use a guidebook and look at different parts of the mushrooms and different things like that. So we have manuals for people who are guiding to talk people through. And then after they finish those 3 walks, then they can go on the forays. And the forays, we don't do guided forays. We have forays where people all get together, and then from a certain point, they leave, they come back at noon. We have the tables out, and then we've got some people that are helping to identify, and we get people to identify. That's what we do. Are other groups doing that, or is it mostly just the foray sections?
No, but I really like that idea. I'll pass it on to the board. I think that's fabulous.
So for context about Cheryl's remarks there, and kind of tying into her question earlier about the size of different clubs, we peaked at about 1,300 family memberships in 2022. That was about 3,000 human beings involved in the club. And our forays just turned into an absolute zoo. As a result, we kind of had to implement these different levels of walks as self-defense more than anything, really. It worked out well. It's turned out to be a very good program, both in terms of managing member knowledge and alleviating the pressure on the experts at the foray tables, and also in keeping the volunteer pipeline going, because it gave us an opportunity to recruit during these guided walks.
All right. Any other questions or things we want to talk about?
I have a comment about the Toronto method. I think you have to have a big club in order to have that level of gradation for your forays. I couldn't see us doing that in Missouri. We're about 300. So that would be a pipe dream for us, I think.
300 was kind of where we were, or maybe a bit more, but not everybody showed up. That was just membership, and not all family memberships, but just the same people used to show up. And then when COVID came, people would just get bag full of mushrooms and hand it out and say, can I eat this? And there's like 50 mushrooms inside. So basically the 3 levels of walks are constantly don't eat anything. There's a lot of don't eat it unless you know exactly what it is. So
Peggy, our club is only about just under 400, and it really depends who's involved, I think. And if you have enough experts or not even enough, either way, it really helps to have a bit of a multi-level thing, because you can have someone who's not a mycologist lead some of those intro forays, and then that lessens the work on the mycologists. And that's what I'm seeing is really helpful for our club, because we have lots of mycologists, but they're often very busy throughout the fall, and therefore we're limited. So this is a great way to just kind of get people's passions going, and then you can kind of wait for some bigger forays for later. I don't know. Yeah, it's just a thought. I think it's great.
Our forays, I would say the majority of people who attend are not members. So the whole point of our forays is to get the idea of what's out there and educating on mushrooms and getting interest, as opposed to holding them specifically for members. So again, I think if we put restrictions, we would really cut down on participation.
We've had to, our forays are limited to members, mostly for insurance reasons and stuff like that. In the past, we've had issues with people, especially new members, going out and picking everything that they come across every mushroom, and same kind of thing, bringing it back and trying to sort it out. And, there's, and when I say that, I mean, they're vacuuming everything up. And it's like, hey, unless it's something that you are going to eat, one or two specimens amongst the group is plenty for identification. And if it turns out it's something that you would like to have more of, you can always go back and get them. But just picking everything is just it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, we're not allowed to pick for eating. We specifically say we won't pick for eating for any of our forays, because in a day, like a Saturday or a Sunday in spring or fall, we'll do a foray, which maybe 10 or 20 people will show up to. We'll do one of the level 2s, which is the intermediate. And there's 2 groups, so maybe there'll be like 10 or 30 people. And then we'll have a welcome to mycology, which it's always full. So if it's 30, there'll be 30. And then sometimes people don't show up. But so that's a lot of people for one day for one forest. And if we have a permit for it, we're not allowed to pick for eating. So we can't pick for eating, and we have to discourage it and say you have to really know where you're picking if it's legal, and everyone has to be a member that's doing the walk because of our insurance.
Yes, so to confirm, like in British Columbia, we are not allowed to remove anything from any foray site, especially because it's all park. And it's Crown land's too far for us to get to, so we can't remove anything. So we talk about edibility, but it's purely for members because of insurance purposes. If anyone gets lost or hurt, we're liable. So no non-member can attend. With or without a waiver. We were educated from a law firm. Don't even bother with a waiver for that for a non-member. So unfortunately, only members. But our presentations where we have lots of mushrooms on display whenever we can for every month. And guests are available because we pay for insurance for that. Yeah, I don't know. That's tough. I'm impressed that you guys run forays for the public. It's ballsy.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
good though.
we tell people you can come to one foray if you're not a member. After that, you have to join. So you can come to one and check it out. We make them sign a disclaimer, and this disclaimers hold up somewhat. I don't know about in Canada, but here they hold up somewhat. But and it's real basic.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate that that they're and I don't know what the structure of the lands that you're on, and I fully appreciate if you're running multiple forays on a single site in a single day, that becomes a problem. We're on our primary foray sites here. We have permits and are limited to a certain number of people, and we have to break those groups up so that we're not going in the woods with a larger number of people and stuff like that. But we're also pushing back on the restrictions that exist or are being proposed for certain public lands, restricting foraging. Unfortunately, some of those restrictions are not based on science. They're not well thought out. Uh, uh, and again, I don't know your individual situation, but we're trying to bring some clarity to those activities to really protect public access to public land for the purpose of responsible and sustainable foraging.
Where are you located, Peter?
Minnesota.
Okay. Okay. I am noticing the talk in here about insurance and liability. It's a big topic that a lot of people are very interested in. Um, for another day. Yeah. Um, any other comments or questions on volunteerism? We have a few minutes left.
Apologies for showing up late. I had to work late today. Is there going to be the recording available for us to view later for that part that I missed?
Yes. Yes, we will. After this is edited, it'll get up on the website. And I know there was some request about sharing the slide deck as well as the actual survey. So I will figure out how to do that and make that available at some point in the near future. So. All right. Well, it sounds like we're kind of wrapping up here. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. This was a great conversation, and thank you again to all the clubs that filled out that information. I'm gonna maybe we'll task the club relations committee with thinking about how we could do something like this, talking about insurance and liability. It seems like a little bit more complicated of a subject, but maybe
Luke, can I just ask something?
Yeah.
Since everybody's here, you
Yeah.
said something about putting this up on the website. I assume you mean to the public. Does that mean all these faces are going to be there? I mean, I actually don't have my audio on, but I mean, or my video on, but I'm just wondering about that.
Mm,
If
This
you're
is Trent
recording your,
here. Hi, this is Trent. I'm going to say yes. If you're speaking, your face will be on the recording.
I just want people to know that.
Yeah, and I guess when we came in, you did have to say, okay, you're being recorded. So, you know, but that is worth pointing out to everybody. You are recorded, and this will be publicly available.
and everyone here is beautiful, so don't sweat it. Okay. Yes, I will save the chat as well. So chat, slides, survey, and the recordings all saved, and we'll figure out how to make this available to all of the clubs and all the participants here.
All right. Thank you, Luke. That was great.
Cool. Well, thank you again for everyone for coming, and I guess we'll talk soon. Have a great night, everyone.